processed with us grief in the last episode, and now we are doing post-traumatic growth and everything that has come out of that season of pain and processing and healing and working together. So go back and listen to that episode. But for today, we're now talking about how to unlock your creative genius. Thanks for being with us today, Clint. He is a transformative speaker, coach, and leader, writer, communicator. So thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you, Dr. Shannan. Glad to be back. And we're going to go for it with part 2 and really help some people today.
Yes. So define for us, what is creative genius? Because I don't want anyone to excommunicate, or that's not the right word. I don't want anyone to not see that in themselves. I want people to see that even if they haven't tapped into it yet.
Absolutely, which is a great way to launch out on what is creative genius, because I think the truth is, and I've done this in a room. Actually, I had a talk recently where there was a whole bunch of people in the room. And I asked, how many of you are creative, think you have a creative genius? And literally there was only about a third of the room that raised their hand. And that was kind of high. More often than not, when I've done something like that, it's more like 10 to 20% max. Because when we think of creative genius, we always think of right away, a musician, a singer, an artist, something along those lines. And the truth is, God created a creative genius in us that's unique to all of us. And so it can take so many different forms. So what I want to launch out is, first, I want to bring proof, because I think it's really important before we say too much. There's already people right now, you're listening to us, you're going, okay, well, I know I don't have any creative genius. So here's something really cool that I discovered last year. There was a NASA study that was done. And what they did was they brought in 2 scientists. Their names were Land and Jarman. And the reason they brought them in is they wanted to see if they could create a test that could measure the creative genius of their rocket scientists, for the simple purpose that they wanted to see if they could assign the most difficult challenges or problems to this particular group. And that really is the true definition of creative genius. That is our ability to think outside the box. That's a very popular, easy way to say it, to be able to come up with creative ideas and solutions. So these 2 scientists created this exam, and it ended up being actually very simple to implement. So what was exciting for NASA is it ended up being very accurate. What was exciting for the scientists is they decided that since this is such a simple exam to give, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to take it. They decided, let's see if we can measure the creative genius over time. So they actually ended up starting with 1,600 children, 4 to 5 years old. And they gave them this exam. And this will blow your mind, Shannan. Just wild guess. What do you think the percentage that came back that tested 4 or 5 years old as a creative genius?
I'm going to guess high. 80%. I don't know.
Yeah, I wanted to guess around there too, because I think that's a typical number. 98.
Wow, that's awesome.
98%. Now, just stop there for a second. I want people to just let that sink in for just a second. Because when I heard that, I exploded with excitement. And then also kind of a little bit of frustration built into that too. Because I was thinking, oh my gosh, I know 98% of the population don't act creatively, or we don't think we're creative, right? Yeah. So here's where it gets crazy. They decide to retest, same 1,600 kids 5 years later.
Wow.
The number dropped to 30%.
Oh, sad. 30%. Exact same kids?
Exact same kids, 30%. 5 years later, so now they're in high school, they tested again, same 1,600 kids, down to 12%.
Oh my gosh.
In the final test with this particular group, it wasn't exactly 5 years. They did it between the ages of 25 and 31. As you know, they wanted to wait until they were at least 25 because that's when your brain stops cooking, right? So anyway, they gave them this exam and it was now down to just 2%.
Wow.
Which, if you're going to leave it there, that's a very sad story, right?
Yeah.
And some people listening to this may be going, I'm part of that 2%. but what we recognize out of that is that the creative genius was in there.
Yeah.
And is in there. But there's a lot of factors, of course, over time. And we talked about trauma and different things in our last episode. but certainly trauma, but also even the way our school system is designed here in the United
Yes.
States. And this is not, I'm not bagging teachers or the educational
Sure.
system at all. We have lots of great people doing great work and really, have the best interest in mind for our children. But the reality of it is not everybody learns the same way, right?
Yeah.
So the truth is, a lot of times, even children very young start out very creative and very with the ability to problem solve in those things. But then over time and getting beat down by the system, or maybe even,
Yes.
sometimes by abuse or just words of other people. And
Mhm.
so that creativity disappears. Now,
Mhm.
what's fascinating about what happened with one of the scientists is he decided to continue to do this. He's actually replicated this over 1 million times now, tested over 1 million people with
Wow.
the same results. But here's where it gets exciting. And I want to throw this back to you because you're going to be able to speak to this part of it way better than I can. But even he, who I'm not going to say is an atheist, but I just haven't been able to find any evidence that he necessarily believes in God. But
Uh-huh.
he definitely believes in intelligent design. Because one thing that he has recently said is, he goes, the fascinating thing about this and what's so exciting is that the mechanism, the ability to think this way is
Wow.
built into you in such a way that you can never lose it because it's divergent thinking, and you use that when you dream. Now, as you
Ooh.
know, we use it outside that as well. But
Yeah.
think about that for a second. God created it in such a way where we have this creative genius, and when we're young, without all the stuff that's happened, right,
Mhm.
we're
Yeah.
able to actually activate it. But then over time we lose it, but we haven't actually lost it. We just don't know that we either have it or we've basically forgotten how to tap into it. Isn't that
Yeah.
exciting?
Absolutely. Yes. And I think we actually have a part of our spirit is a creative, brilliant, genius part of us. But when we go into performance, when we care about the test grade and looking like everyone else and fitting in and trying to look socially normal, I think a lot of that starts to cloud our ability to access that creative part of our spirit, man. So I love what you're saying. And I've experienced that in my own life.
Yeah, I have too, actually. So this all kind of happened around the same time that we were in that first year or so, coming out of the initial part of the grieving process. And so I began to think, wow, okay, I've thought about writing a book, for so many years. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if I mentioned this the last time, but I had people asking me and even telling me in some cases, hey, you need to write a book, going back probably 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I always thought, yeah, that would be cool. And, you know, sure, I'll do that someday. But fear, all those things that go into it, I just never did it. And I began to realize, shoot, maybe this really is in me. And so one of the first things I do, because you have to activate it, right? You can't just, okay, now I have that information. Great. What? Right.
Right.
And so I decided, I went to a workshop. It was a 2-day workshop to learn how to write a book. What it really did was, it wasn't so much the nuts and bolts, right? It wasn't, how you write a sentence or, write a grammatically correct paragraph, but it was more so about just an approach to how you can form your ideas. Now, here's what I didn't recognize at the time that was really cool. One of the things I was asked to do was mind map.
Mhm.
Well, I had done a little bit of mind mapping, like maybe once or twice in the last decade. I mean, hardly ever. So I was familiar with the idea of it, but I hadn't really, allowed that to become a practice. And of course, that's what I decided to do because that's what I was being taught. It's like,
Mhm.
go this route, map it out, write out all your different ideas, the things you can write about. Well, Shannan, it ended up completely unlocking me and unlocking not just my creativity, but also the ability to think about how I would approach even
Mhm.
writing a book and what
Yeah.
that would look like. And so then I would discover later what you already know, which is mind mapping is one way that you can develop and grow your divergent thinking. So that was a very real example for me
Yeah.
of,
Well, why don't you define for our audience, just in case people haven't heard of mind mapping?
yeah, mine. Well, here's what I would recommend because I've seen so many different ways to do it. I would Google it and look at many different examples, but
Mhm.
essentially mind mapping, I like to call it mind dumping. I just, for some reason, I like that term, but basically you're just writing down words or maybe just, a very short phrase of different ideas. Like I was wanting to write a book. So the mind mapping was, what would I write about? So I began to think about what expertise do I have? So I wrote down, okay, leadership. I've been training leaders for 20 years. So leadership, marriage. I've been married for 20 years and that's not enough, right? I've actually helped people with marriages. I have a healthy marriage. So I wrote down marriage, parenting, family, and just began to write down all these different words, not trying to create anything concrete, not trying to write the book, not trying to even decide the name of a chapter or anything like that, but just began to draw. And I used circles and lines, and that's where mind mapping is really fun and exciting because there's so many ways to do it. You can use colors, you can use all kinds of different methods. So for those of you who have never heard of that before, Google it and make sure you look at several different hits that you're going to get on that, because you're going to see some pictures of many different ways to do it, one of which I'm sure will be helpful to you.
Absolutely. And many times the area where you've been attacked the most is the area that you are supposed to be creative. So I want you to listen right now to your own internal self-critic, the area where you're like, oh, I'm not a good writer. I'm not a good communicator. Oh, I can't paint. Oh, I can't dance. Oh, I can't perform. Oh gosh, you never want me in front of a camera. Whatever that might be, I want you to think of the area of most resistance and then be curious about how that's actually the area that needs to be unlocked. And then I love the idea of mind mapping because you're not creating, you're not putting performance pressure. Right. And that's where a lot of people get stuck because they prematurely try to just set out and do the thing, rather than just allowing that creativity to awaken. And as you write and you explore and you just like put things out there, write it down and use color and use images and circles and squares and whatever to you feels fun. And again, you can Google all of this and get inspiration on how, or you can do it your own way. Absolutely. But it's really important because I've also had many people say throughout the years, like, you really need to write. You have to write this restoring self-cohesion stuff. And so I'm like, yeah, good. And I'd sit down and write and nothing would happen. Anybody listening right now, like you do the thing, like you're trying to act in it and nothing happens. And I just have too much caffeine and then I crash and I'm like, how many calories did I consume today? Trying to get me to sit still and do this, and it's miserable. So I had to mind map and start going back and even processing for myself, what are the core lies? What are the beliefs? When I was a kid, I had all these awards for creative writing. And then I had totally forgotten until I asked the Lord, hey, God, is there a reason I'm having a hard time writing? And he took me back to a memory of transitioning to a new school, and they didn't like my creative writing. I was exposed to Edgar Allan Poe at this very artsy California school when I shouldn't have been. I was like second, third grade. That's way too young to be reading Edgar Allan Poe.
That's a little dark and weepy. Yeah, I don't know.
Very dark. So now I'm at this Christian prep school and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm writing like horror, really dark stuff, because that's what I was exposed to in my artsy school. And so I got really bad remarks about the content, not the actual like ability to write, but as a kid, I didn't know how to discern that. And so I had shut off that creative writing gift. And then also being bad at spelling and grammar and all those things, I associated writing with being bad, with being not good enough, with everyone else, what comes easy for them. And I just want you, as you're listening, the area that you've struggled, where you have felt not enough, where it feels like things come easily to everyone else, odds are good, that's an area you're called to be creatively genius. And the resistance is actually confirmation that you're on the right path. There's something God has for you, and he wants to awaken and stir up all these great things, but the resistance is evidence. And I'll share more later, but right now I want to get back to you in helping us. Okay, we're mind mapping. What's our next step?
Yeah. So once you do the mind mapping, then of course you got to have a plan. A lot of it's depending on what you're going to do. Of course, I was writing a book, so I had to have a plan on how to sit down and actually execute this. And so getting rid of distractions, creating an atmosphere, I needed to create a space that was quiet, really practical stuff. Right. And I found that by doing the mind mapping, by using that creative tool to get things cooking, and then by setting an environment aside where I just dedicated time to it. And for me, it's a lot of ways to do it. I dedicated 8:30 to 10:30 every morning, Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 every and I had a certain number of words that I had a goal to write. I'm not even going to give that number out there, because if someone's listening to us right now, this is not a formula, but this is just something that I decided this is going to be my path. And it was amazing. I found that my mind was open. I was more creative than I thought I ever could possibly be with the way I wrote, with the word. I was like, wow, this is actually pretty decent. You know, it was really an enjoyable experience. But you said something a second ago that I'd like to park on for just a second, because I think it's so powerful. You were talking about having kind of a negative experience, right? And getting this negative feedback about the way you were processing the information that you were taught. That's all you were doing. You were being creative, but you were being creative in a way that just wasn't quite understood, or maybe the right mood for
not in that context.
Yeah. But the thing is that's how we have viewed so many people. And I came across something just this last week. You may have heard of this. I'm going to read it really quickly, because there's a large number of our listeners right now that have either suffered from ADHD or know someone that has. And there was a research that was done, and it was done with, this is by some neuroscientists, with some ADHD patients. And what they discovered, listen to this, those of you who think you can't focus, you're not creative, they found that the ADHD people were exceptionally good at divergent thinking tasks, such as inventing creative new uses for everyday objects, brainstorming new features for an innovative cell phone design, for example. And then in a new study, college students with ADHD scored higher than non-ADHD peers on 2 tasks that tapped conceptual expansion and the ability to overcome knowledge constraints. Another way you might say that is to think outside of the box, right?
Come on.
So there's so many people listening right now that have also been labeled, if I could say it that way.
Yes.
Whether it's by, a diagnosis of ADHD, or whether it's just unkind words that you're not creative, or you're terrible, or you're not smart, or you're not this, you're not that. And that also can get in your way. But I'm here to tell you today, Shannan's here to tell you today, you are creative and you can tap into it, and you can see some amazing things happen. I want to share really quickly, this happened with my bride, Amaryllis. As you know, she's an artist, she's a painter, and she's actually really recognized now internationally. She's been invited to some pretty big shows, but it didn't start that way. And literally what happened one day, and I guess I should frame it this way to be completely fair and truthful to the story. She did used to draw a lot as a kid. So it's not like,
the potential was there. Just
like she, and when I say she can draw, she could draw, I can't even draw a straight stick man. Drawing is not my thing. So you knew something was there, but she had never tried to paint before. And she had never tried to paint, especially with any kind of thick medium, using clay and sculpting and those types of methods. And so one day she had in her mind, there was a very specific image that she wanted to create. It was actually from a dream that someone had given her. And she had this idea of what it could look like, but she had no idea how to actually physically do it. And what she did was she kicked everybody out, right? She set the environment, including me, kicked everybody out. She set up her space. She got the materials that she thought she would need to use. And she quite literally stood in front of that canvas and asked God to create with her. Show me how to do this. I want to know how to do this. And I wish I had a picture to be able to, show your listeners right now, but the end result of that, 2 hours later, mind you, was incredible. It's a painting. It's these beautiful angel wings that have become incredibly popular as far as her art goes. That particular piece will never be for sale. It's very special to us, but she's created different versions of that for different people. And that was one thing that launched her into the art world, was just being open and embracing that God had given her a creative genius, and even to the degree of inviting him in to join her in it. And she had so much joy, so much fun doing it. And the rest is history.
I love it. I love it. So for those that struggle that feel like the oddball. You may have ADHD. You may also have dyslexia. There are
Right.
tons of research studies on divergent learning styles, learning differences, including dyslexia and other types of learning differences. And really brilliant because you do think differently, and that makes you disruptive and not just accept the status quo. And our society likes the little box and easy and just be quiet and keep your hand down and just do what I say, because it helps us test
Right.
and pass the class. But we also want a society that embraces the fumbly, messy middle of being creative, of being different, of asking questions. And on behalf of any parent, teacher, coach, principal, aunt, or uncle who has ever made you, or a peer or sibling, who's ever made you feel dumb in your difference instead of celebrated in your difference, I repent to you.
Yeah.
I am so sorry for the ways that our society tries to put everyone in a box. And God has made you purposefully creative and brilliant and different and wonderful. And there are some things that really can only be expressed through creativity. I went through a lot of grief in grad school. It was like the hardest season, not the hardest, but one of the hardest seasons of my life. And all of a sudden, I just felt like I am so stuck. I feel not suicidal, but like dead inside. Like I don't know how to like bring my joy back. And I had some friends that were like real artists. And I was like, you know what? I just decide that I am creative and I'd never painted a day in my life. And so I just went to their backyard in nature and listened to this really epic, great music and started painting and started to really process grief through painting in a way that I couldn't with just language alone. I also started soaking. For anyone who hasn't done soaking before, it's where you let the worship music just wash over you rather than feeling like you have to give or perform or be on, and you just let that fill you back up. And so what's been fascinating as I'm on this journey of going, okay, I sit down, I'm going to write, I've set aside the time, I've healed from the lie. All right, why is it still not coming? Anybody out there resonate where you're like, okay, I know that the creativity is in me. Why is it not happening? Then I've had lots of people say, I really feel like you should paint before you write. But of course, being practical and only having so much time, so I think, then I would be like, oh, that kind of seems frivolous. I don't want to do that. So also be mindful. What are the suggestions other people may have said that you just kind of poo-pooed, instead of like what Clint is sharing today? He's giving us really practical advice. Like even things like drink plenty of water, get tons of exercise, lots of sleep, lots of joy, lots of laughter, maybe something else creative. And I just went to Colorado. You guys, I haven't worked on my book in 6 months. It's a fun, great book, but it's just like it has been on the back burner, something I want to do, but I haven't been doing. Anybody resonate, you know?
Yes.
And so by going to Colorado and being bored in a good way, and like I decided I am not working, I am not doing anything productive. I even read stupid fiction books that are not good for me, you know, like not in a bad way, not good for me, but like I'm not learning anything. And always
you didn't go back to
learning.
Edgar Allan Poe, did you?
No. I read dumb, like best-selling New York Times, like fiction, like dumb books. And so I didn't learn anything. I did not use my brain at all. And I just went on nature walks and hiked and got like 10 miles a day and sunshine. And then before I knew it, I started painting and drawing. And then on the way back, we had a 12-hour drive. And I'm just starting to write on my book because I want to, for the first time in 6 months, not realizing how much we drive ourselves and then try to switch gears and be creative. So many times we think we're not creative because we just want to watch Netflix or just zone out. That's actually a sign of burnout, not a sign of lack of creativity. Can you speak to that for us?
Yeah, well, one thing I want to point out to that too that we haven't mentioned yet, and that is there are people that have a creative genius and they're operating in it every day, but because it's not artistic, they don't even know. So we want to make sure we point that out as well. You know, I have a friend who is a forensic accountant.
Ooh.
Now, that's incredibly intimidating to me to even think about.
That's awesome.
But here's a man who is incredibly creative. Now, how to ask him that question? He was, oh, I'm not a creative, but he is absolutely creative. He uses his mind to be able to pull out patterns and information through numbers and things like that to be able to solve problems, right? Or in some cases, detect fraud or whatever. But, there's so many forms of creative genius.
Yes.
And so we also want to encourage you in that today as well, that as much as we talked about a few minutes ago, that it may be something that you're just completely locked down and think you have nothing. It may also be something that you do so naturally that you don't even know it's a thing, that you don't even know it's a creative genius. And so you kind of dismiss it. And so I want to make sure we make that point. And you brought up something a second ago that I think is fascinating about how it can unveil things that maybe you didn't even realize were challenging you. Much like you, I did an exercise a while back. You were actually a part of that. We were part of a group that did this exercise where we painted. Well, I'm not a painter either. That's not, my expression, right? But I found myself, we were working with watercolors and I started to figure out what I was going to paint. And there was this particular image that I used to draw as a little boy.
Oh.
That was the first thing that popped into my head. And I've seen this image a million times. I drew it a million times as a kid, had never really thought much about it, had never even really looked up what it was in reality. It was something I liked to draw. And so I included that in this painting. And so I did this painting and, I was very happy with it at the end. Unfortunately, when I did the blind test in front of my kids and asked them to figure out which one was mom's and which one was mine, they figured it out really quickly. But what I realized, Shannon, was, and I didn't know this until later on the night when I really began to think about it, this particular object that I drew is an image that is very often used in the nautical world as an image of a compass.
Oh, wow.
And what immediately struck me was from a very young age, I wanted to help people. Now, I didn't always have the wisdom. I didn't always have the knowledge. I didn't always have those things.
Yeah.
But I always wanted to help people. And I began to realize that I was always drawing something that was an image of helping people have a compass for life, to find their true north, right? And that's something that came back to me. And so I just thought, wow, this is so amazing, so incredible that an exercise in creativity could actually reveal something to me about me from way, way back.
Yes.
So I think that's really cool. Yeah. And then I love what you already said. And one of the things I think is really cool about doing something different is, and this is what I do with different clients and stuff, that sometimes you do need to break yourself out of your own rhythm, the normal ways that you do things. So maybe you sit in an office at the same computer during the same time of day. Your creative genius may get unlocked by going for a walk, literally, or by painting or going axe throwing or doing some sort of activity. You mentioned soaking. There may be a lot of people out there who have never even tried it. It could be you're a business owner that desperately needs a creative business plan and you're stuck. And you could try that exercise of soaking. You could try an exercise of going and trying to paint something, going to wine with a twist or whatever they call that. And that may sound so contrary, like, well, I'm wasting my time. I shouldn't take my time off of just trying to create this thing, right? Yeah. And the reality of it is that that other activity may be the very thing that unlocks the true creative genius in you.
Agree. Because when we're in task oriented, you're too much in your prefrontal cortex. So the brain is in trying to solve a problem and process. And that's exactly what I was doing wrong. I was sitting down to do a task, to cross something off the list, to accomplish something, which means I'm activating my soul. I'm activating my mind instead of activating my spirit, creativity, brilliance, bright things that come out of our heart, not our head. So that's why going on a walk, soaking, doing something adventurous or playful or being bored or going on a hike, all of those things are so essential to unlock your spiritual creativity. And that's where your genius comes from. Because Clint and I have gone back and forth trying to set this time for us to do the interview. And I think it's actually better that we did it right after I got back from Colorado, because I have such a fresh joy and peace and realness of doing it in my own life versus a bit of workaholism. Don't judge. I'm trying.
No judgment here.
And so, we have these times that we're trying to muscle through instead of unlocking our creative brilliance and genius by doing the things that seem counterintuitive. It seems like it's a waste of time. But I want you as the listener right now to reflect, what are some creative things you've done your entire life? And again, that could be numbers. That could be being brilliant with lots of different things. My dad and brother are both dyslexic. And so they can envision, they can see a building 3D completed outside of the box, and yet not the greatest of spellers, like
Sure.
We've got some strengths and weaknesses here, right? So not super great on a report card, but IQ like nobody's business, and some of the smartest people I know, but they're not necessarily celebrated in traditional school and academic and work settings, but they're phenomenal entrepreneurs. And so for you, as you're listening, what are things that have always been there? Like Clint shared, by being creative, he saw something in himself from childhood that's always been there. And it was unlocked. It was revealed when he allowed himself to be creative, even in something he wasn't quote unquote good at. So you might not be good at drawing, you might not be good at creating music or dance or whatever, but by just doing it and allowing yourself to engage in your spirit, man, you're allowing these beautiful aspects of your dimensions to finally surface and to get a voice. So we have 1 minute left. What are some takeaway practical things we can do, Clint?
There was an activity that I gave one of my clients about a year ago that I want to bring up really quick. It's an out of the box idea. People never think to do this, but I literally told her, I said, I want you to take at least one full day and a night, if not an entire weekend, and go on a date with yourself. Go find a Airbnb, bread and breakfast somewhere that you like. I want you to take your favorite things, your favorite foods, your favorite things to drink, whatever. And this is someone who was really stuck, really, really stuck with toxic thinking, stuck with literally a toxic body, had gained quite a bit of weight, all these different things. Well, that doesn't sound too exciting to some people, or it doesn't sound too profound. She did it. So through that weekend, she lost 20 pounds in about a 24-hour period. But what was really exciting for her was she ended up learning that she had 2 different artistic creative gifts that she really didn't even know she had. And she started to dabble in it. And now it's actually turned into some really cool things that she does from a ministry standpoint, and even sell some things.
Did you say she lost 20 pounds in 24 hours?
I did. What? Yeah, that's exactly right.
You could make billions in the dieting market.
I know. Well, and we're convinced, and I'm sure you could speak to the reasonings behind this, but I'm absolutely convinced there was a major toxic relationship that had been a massive impact for decades.
Wow.
That she, during that weekend alone by herself, for the first time, just decided to let it go, and that she was enough, and that she could choose to live her own life and not be held captive to someone else. And she literally lost over 20 pounds in about a 24-hour period. Crazy. 45 pounds in 30 days. And has continued to grow healthier and healthier, and is in a really healthy weight now.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, really cool. Really cool. But just getting away and doing something very intentional, but very different, away from all the normal distractions. Yeah. And she actually discovered some creative gifts that she didn't even know she had.
Wow. Okay. So what's our takeaway? We need to try things that we wouldn't normally, and set aside time, prioritize, do things that people suggest, even though we think it sounds like a waste of time. What else do we need to do?
I think one of the things I would do is, well, I love all those suggestions. Those are all wonderful. And then I would gather a few of the people that I know, the most intimate friends, and ask them what they see in me. Where do they see creativity in me? Because chances are really good that they're going to let them know areas of creativity that they have that maybe, again, they just didn't recognize, and then they could really capitalize on it and grow even, stronger in.
Yes, I love that. And I would say my brother is a phenomenal cook, chef person. And so there's lots of different ways you can be creative. It could be with food, it could be with animals, it could be with sewing. There's a million different things out there. So I love inviting people into that process. And even our group, so Clint and Amaryllis, his wife, and our little group, we're going to get together and we're going to do art. So we're going to report back how it goes. Even if some of us don't necessarily identify as artists, you never know what could be unlocked. Either that or that it's preparing you to unlock something else that's been dormant. So
exactly. And I think that's the greatest value, Shannan, is it could unlock the creative genius that you really need to solve a really big problem.
Yep. I love that. So right now we just release a blessing over everyone listening, your creative gift coming alive, that everything that has wounded and held back your creativity, we just release a movement of breeze to push that aside and for the boldness to come forward to try things you know you may not even be good at, that you are never going to display in the museum, but it's for your own sake. It's a date for yourself on the weekend. It's soaking because it's good for you. It's stepping away from the computer to go on a walk because you're reconnecting with your breath. You're reconnecting with your spirit, allowing yourself to come back online and not work from depletion into task-oriented, like all of us, including me, but learning how to really draw out the creative genius inside of you. Everyone, it is such a privilege to see you come alive. Thank you, Clint. He's a coach. So transformative speaker, communicator, coach, and writer. And he has a book. What's your book called again?
Big, Bold, Brave, How to Live Courageously in a Risky World.
I love it. So you can contact him at
bigboldbrave.us.
I love it. Okay, so guys, we want to hear from you. Please write in and we want to celebrate you and highlight you for the ways that you're being creative and challenging yourself to step outside of the box and use your creative genius. Bye, guys. See you next time.